Coming up on Primetime Politics Weekend, the politics of healthcare.
We need more work, and we need premiers to let us do that work.
As Ottawa and the provinces enter the holidays in a stalemate over funding, we will speak with the head of Eastern Ontario's Children's Hospital. What is actually needed on the front lines and what to make of the political bickering.
I think it's important to know that, well, the House is lifting, and that means that there's a temporary pause on legislative action, that the work of the government never ceases.
We will speak with the government House Leader about that healthcare dispute and the sitting that's just wrapped up in the House of Commons.
Foreign interference is not tolerable in Canada. We just won't accept it.
From a new strategy in the Indo-Pacific to Chinese interference in Haiti, we will speak with the Foreign Affairs Minister about the challenges Canada faces internationally and where this country is being asked to help around the world. This is Primetime Politics Weekend. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. As Parliament ends its sitting for the holiday break, hospitals across this country are still in crisis. Children's hospitals in particular are inundated with respiratory cases right now, and elsewhere in the system, primary care doctors are impossible to find and nurses are burnt out and leaving. Now, the provinces are asking for more money, but the Trudeau government is asking for modernization and accountability. There is, as a result, a stalemate and the two sides are not meeting. Although it seems there has been some movement behind the scenes. Take a listen now to the Federal Health Minister, Jean-Yves Duclos.
The ball is in the Premier's court. At the Health Minister's level, we all agree. We've got a great relationship. We agree on the diagnostic. We agree on the problems and the solutions to those problems. We were in total agreement in Vancouver in private. The problem is that the Premiers don't want us to speak about those outcomes and those results. They want to maintain a futile fight on dollars.
Well, for his thoughts on the issue, we are now joined by Alex Munter, the President and the CEO of the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, also known as CHEO in Ottawa. Alex, thank you for taking the time today.
Nice to see you again, Michael.
Now, there's a lot to talk about here, but before all else, I did want to get your thoughts on this current impasse. The provincial government's looking for more funding, Ottawa trying to push for reform. And I appreciate that it doesn't really have an immediate impact or bearing on what you're having to deal with right now on the ground. But what do you make of this stalemate?
Is it a stalemate, or is it just the theater that we always have in Canada before we land on a federal-provincial agreement? So they're talking, and hopefully they will come to a conclusion. I do think most healthcare organizations, certainly Healthcare the Ontario Hospital Association would say we do need a greater federal investment in healthcare, and I think there's a recognition that the federal government will want to make sure that there are outcomes for that investment. So I'm hopeful that they will land on a deal that will allow organizations like ours to do what we will need to do over the next number of years, which is really catch up on a backlog of care that has been building for many, many years and that has become particularly acute now.
Well, let's pick up on that point then, because there is a greater discussion to all of this. And again, this has to do with what you are having to deal with on the ground. Your hospital has had to turn to the Red Cross recently for help. What is that like then, right now at CHEO? How is the situation, and how's it been for the past few weeks?
Well, the problem at CHEO, it's the same problem at every single children's hospital across the country, which is that our organizations were simply not built for this kind of demand. For example, our emergency department was built for 150 kids a day. There's not a single day this year that we've had fewer than 150 kids here. And so at the moment, we are seeing record numbers of sick babies, sick children who need to be hospitalized due to respiratory syncytial virus, RSV, flu, COVID, as well as, of course, all the other reasons that kids need to be admitted to hospital. And so, we have 2 pop-up ICUs. We've converted a medical day unit into an inpatient unit. And when I just came back from that unit, it's not unusual to run into a neurologist or a cardiologist or nurses from our various clinics staffing all of these extra beds. And the problem with that, of course, is that they're not in their clinic. They're not in their OR. They're not delivering the planned and scheduled care that kids and families have been waiting for a long time. So there's two surges to think about. There's the surge today, this week, this month, in kids with acute viral illness. And there's the slow motion surge that's building of kids that need an MRI or a specialist appointment or a developmental therapy or surgery that are not getting it. And that's the thing that we're most worried about in the children's world.
Well, talk about that, because I do wonder about the impact. We talk about the impact whenever an adult procedure is delayed. What impact does it have on children to have their procedures delayed and or even transferred so far away from home?
Well, so you know, a child that needs dental surgery and that can't get it will can affect their language acquisition if they're a young child. A child that can't sleep because of tonsillitis and can't learn, it affects their development. It affects their whole family. A child with a disability that needs physiotherapy or occupational therapy and doesn't get it has decreased function. May affect the trajectory of their life, and I could go on. Here's the thing that I think would startle most people. In Ontario today, and I think it's similar across the country, but the Ontario data is the data I know best. In Ontario today, in most parts of Ontario, for most types of care, kids wait longer than adults. Let me repeat that. An adult who needs an MRI or who needs eye surgery or who needs mental health counsel will get it much more quickly in most parts of Ontario than a child or a teenager that needs those same kinds of services. And that's because we have an undersized child and youth health system. And so I'm hopeful, and I know my colleagues across the country, we were just talking about this yesterday, we're hopeful that the silver lining to this surge, the silver lining to the pressure and the stress that everybody is experiencing, kids, families, healthcare providers, is that finally, we've been saying this for years, but finally I think we've got much greater attention and focus on the fact that we have an undersized child and youth health system for a growing population of kids. There's going to be 1 million more kids, over 1 million more kids in 20 years than there are today. And we need to right-size the pediatric health system in Canada.
We're quickly running out of time, Alex, but paint that picture a bit more for us. If we are undersized, what numbers are we actually dealing with here?
Well, I think here in Ontario, just in terms of dealing with the backlog, we were talking about around about $1 billion investment over the next 4 years, which is, in the context of a $75 billion provincial budget, we think manageable cost. And I think the key principle here is we don't want kids waiting longer than adults for care. We want kids to get the care they need when they need it so that they can be kids, that they can go back to school, they can learn, they can develop, and they can contribute in future to our community.
Alex Munter, thank you for this. Really appreciate the time.
Good to see you.
Well, the House of Commons suddenly adjourned on Monday, suspending the day's business upon hearing the news of Jim Carr's death. A member of Justin Trudeau's cabinet, Carr is being remembered for his sense of public service, but also for his decency and for how he dealt with all parliamentarians regardless of position or party. Jim Carr was 71 years old. He was diagnosed with multiple myeloma and kidney failure back in 2019, and while he did undergo treatment, he died Monday morning peacefully, we are told, surrounded by family and friends. Now, the Prime Minister did pay tribute in the House of Commons to his friend and to his colleague, Jim Carr.
In October, he told me that he was stopping treatment. It was a private moment in his hometown. Jim knew it was for the best, but he never let up on his commitment to serving Winnipeggers, Western Canadians, and all Canadians, as well as to building a better future.
Of course, Carr's death was a sad note as Parliament rose for the year. And at this point, MPs are not scheduled to return until late January. This despite ongoing challenges with inflation, with healthcare, and the government's own signature gun bill. To talk about that, we're now joined by the government House Leader, Mark Holland.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, I do want to begin. As much as there's a lot to review here, we have to acknowledge the fact that your colleague, Jim Carr, he has now passed. And I'm wondering what you're feeling right now as we extend our condolences to you. How are you feeling? How do you want Mr. Carr to be remembered?
Well, I had a conversation, and maybe this sums it all up. I had a meeting with Jim Carr just last week, last Thursday, and we were talking about his private member's bill, and we were talking about him giving a speech as his farewell to Parliament. And Jim knew that he didn't have a lot of time left. I had no idea that it was as little time as it was. But Jim was then, in the face of his own death, the person that he was his entire life, which is somebody 100% focused on other people. Asking about how he could ensure that his PMB, because he was so passionate about it and the prairies and the difference that it could make, talking about his colleagues, talking about other people that he cared about and what he wanted for them. He's just that once-in-a-lifetime kind of individual who lights up every room they're in, who pours all of their energy into other people, who is an inspiration, and did it right to his last day. His whole life was about service, right to his last breath. And I think for a lot of us here, not just within the Liberal caucus, but I think our entire parliamentary family, he's going to have a very long legacy. He's somebody that was a mentor and somebody that we want to emulate.
Well, it was beautiful to hear the tributes today, so thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Let's move on now to the last 12 weeks and the weeks ahead, because at this point, here you are, the last day before the holiday break. But really, you leave without passing your government's own signature gun bill. Has the amendment on assault weapons undermined the original intent of banning that handgun bill?
No. I think that what's happened is we've opened up an important conversation on two very sensitive fronts that are incredibly important. On the one hand, we have those that have been victimized by gun crime, who've lost loved ones, who are themselves been victims, who are demanding action to ensure that weapons that are capable of mass destruction, weapons that are assault-style weapons, are taken off the streets. And we all need to be able to look at the victims of gun violence in the eyes and say that we've done everything that we can. And that's an important piece of that. At the same token, we know how important hunting is as something that's an essential part of the life of so many Canadians, not just in a contemporary sense, but over many generations. My grandfather was a hunter. And we know that hunters want to make sure that they can continue that lifestyle that's so important to them and such an important part of Canada. And so there's a lot of sensitivity there to make sure that they're not impacted and their ability to hunt isn't impacted. Those two things are in no way contradictory. And I think this is a moment and an opportunity to step back and make sure that we do get these assault-style weapons off the street and that we don't allow it to impact hunters. And so there's an important conversation that I think is taking place at committee, and it's going to take place with stakeholders over the next coming months. And as so often the case in Parliament when we're dealing with very contentious issues, it takes some time to find that middle ground, and it takes conversations, and you have to work through the sensitivities that are there. And so that's what's happening. That's, I think, very appropriate in this instance, and I think good progress is being made.
Mm-hmm. As you say, talked about amongst committee members, but certainly some members do want this whole bill to go back for further study. Will that happen in the new year?
Absolutely. We're looking at amendments and how we can make changes to make sure that any guns that are used in hunting are not captured in the legislation that's brought forward, making sure that we're talking to stakeholders to combat a lot of disinformation that's out there, frankly, about the bill. I think there are those that are actively looking for solutions, and I would suggest that there are those that are looking for problems and to exacerbate this for political advantage. And given the sensitivities that I just spoke about, I think that's highly inappropriate. I think that it's very important for us to focus on solutions, and that's very much where our mind is as we work through this.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've heard the criticism, and I hear what you're saying right now, but one of the criticisms has been, or at least one of the questions has been, is why did the government not consult more broadly before actually bringing forward this amendment at what's been described as the 11th hour? Did the government fumble there? Should it have consulted more broadly?
Well, I think, that's for others to ask. I mean, I think what we're focused on is finding solutions. And I don't know any government at any point in time that's dealt with highly contentious issues that didn't have to take some time to consider all of the different stakeholder groups and opinions that are incumbent within that. And so that's a natural part of the process. This is a complicated and difficult situation where it is absolutely essential that we take action. And so as we move through this process, making sure that we listen, that we react to feedback, that we ensure that we're getting it right, is a part of what we want to do with everything that we're doing legislatively. I think mistakes are, in my experience in life, mistakes are when you don't listen to feedback, when you refuse to act when information is put in front of you, and when you move forward and do something without considering the implications of it. And that's not what we're doing here. We're taking a step back, making sure the legislation is gotten right. We have a clear, as I've articulated, a clear understanding of what our priorities are here. So we're going to make sure that we get it done right.
Mm-hmm. I also want to talk about your supply and confidence agreement with the NDP, because a lot of work has been done with that in the last 12 weeks. But in the document, it also mentions progress on pharmacare by the end of 2023. So is that something that your government will be moving on when you return at the end of January?
Well, the end of January, there's a lot of conversations, frankly, that need to take place with all of the other parties. And this is one of the things that we do. We're going to take a little bit of time for Christmas and to go back and connect with our communities and our families. And then we jump right into conversations about what the priorities for the new year will be. And that will be with all parties, because I want to really highlight again, we have a supply and confidence agreement. That means that we agree to work with the NDP to have their support for supply and confidence votes, but there's a universe of legislation and priorities that has to be accomplished outside of that. And as is quite normal and is to be expected, the NDP and ourselves have a lot of differences. You would have seen those played out in a lot of different ways. But we've been able to work through them and be able to get a lot done, not just with the NDP, but with Parliament generally, and that's what we want to continue doing. I think the supply and confidence agreement generally has worked very well, that we've been able to have a high degree of communication and collaboration to understand each other. But I don't think it's just with the NDP. I have to say that over the last while, the conversations with the Bloc Québécois, as an example, they've been very productive. And that as well, we're making progress in having conversations with the Conservatives. And I think I just want to take a moment to highlight the fact that that's what Canadians are expecting right now. We're in a highly tumultuous global environment right now that is very challenged. And they're not interested, Canadians, in seeing us exacerbate differences and focus on problems. They really want us to see us focusing on solutions, and that's what we're coming into the new session focused on. Okay,
you speak of solutions, but of course, as Parliament rises, there's still this crisis happening in healthcare. You see it in pediatric hospitals right across the country. At this point, there seems to be an impasse between provinces and the federal government. What type of movement is going to happen there over the next few weeks? What do you say to people that are frustrated to see politicians rise for a winter break when healthcare is still in crisis?
Well, I think it's important to know that while the House is lifting, and that means that there's a temporary pause on legislative action that the work of the government never ceases, that our work on healthcare and any myriad of other issues continues each and every day, and that with respect to healthcare, we've been very clear. We're ready to come to the aid of provinces with additional resources and support, but it has to be tied to outcomes. Canadians know that money on its own is not enough, that they have to see clear metrics that their access to health care and the health care they receive is improving. And if they don't see assurances of that, and all it is money, then frankly, they would have a great deal of reason to be cynical. So what we've said to the provinces is we're ready to help, but Canadians need to be able to see tangible results. They need to be able to see the metrics to prove that's working. And of course, that is something that we're 100% committed to. So we need to act with urgency, but it isn't enough just to take some kind of placebo action. It has to be rooted in actual, tangible change that's improving the healthcare outcomes for Canadians.
Mark Holland, thank you so much for the time tonight.
Thank you.
The House of Commons is a quiet place right now. The fall sitting officially over as MPs head back to their ridings for the holiday break. Now, much has been accomplished, but much still has been left undone. And that includes the provinces and Ottawa stuck in a stalemate over health care. With that, let's bring in our political observers. Susan Smith is principal with the Blue Sky Strategy Group. Kate Harrison is vice chair with Summa Strategies. And Kim Wright is the principal for Wright Strategies. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Susan, I'll get you to start us off because here we have the provinces. They want Ottawa to invest more in health care. They want reliable and predictable funding. Now, I spoke with the Premier of New Brunswick, and he, like other provincial leaders, he says they want a meeting with Justin Trudeau directly. Now, Trudeau seems to say the ball is in the Premier's court. So what more is he looking for? If there is this desire amongst premiers already expressed, what's he waiting for?
Well, I think what's important to understand in this particular case on the healthcare issue, Michael, is that the health ministers have agreed on what needs to be done. They've agreed that there should be more investment in recruitment and retention and foreign credential recognition for nurses and doctors. They've agreed on data sharing, but the premiers have said to their ministers, no, don't be talking about that publicly. We want to battle this out, premier to prime minister. And so I think there's politics at play here, really quite significantly and a bit to the detriment of the healthcare system at the moment. The premiers are looking for a 35%, in their terms of 35% contribution, no strings attached. The feds already give the province, they cover about 38% through a combination of cash and tax transfer points. So it's how the math is being done on either side, and the fact that the premiers just want a blank check. And I think in this day and age, you can't just hand over a blank check. You have to show what those improvements will be. That's where I think the impasse is.
Kate, what's your take on this? Because I wonder if you understand where Ottawa's coming from. Here you have the provinces, for the most part, in surplus. In fact, they're giving out checks in Alberta and Quebec. Is it disingenuous of the provinces to say that they need more money for health care?
I don't know that it's disingenuous, but I do think that it's not a holistic look at the problem. Of course, if you're the federal government right now, you don't want to be anywhere near the healthcare file. It is a complete mess. From their perspective, it's provincial jurisdiction, and they want the premiers, particularly conservative premiers, to wear just how bad the situation is in provinces like Ontario and elsewhere in the prairies, et cetera. So from Ottawa's perspective, you don't want to be near that conversation. But from the Premier's perspective, this is very much a mutual responsibility and a shared responsibility. As Susan mentioned, the foreign credentialing, recruitment, retention, those are all supported by the federal government. There's other things the federal government can be doing right now, working to speed up, for example, the ability of pharmacists to prescribe to make simple prescriptions. So this is very much an area where they need to be working together. I don't think it's too much to ask the man who is in meeting all days for a meeting with the country's provincial leaders to discuss such an important issue.
Now, Kim, Jagmeet Singh says he's ready to pull support for the Liberal government if there's no movement on healthcare. How serious is that threat, or is really this a case of crying wolf?
It's not
not a case of crying wolf at all. In fact, Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats have been very clear on this confidence and supply agreement that it is an ongoing discussion, an ongoing dialogue between the parties, between party leadership, to make sure that the priorities of Canadians, including healthcare, are actually being lived up to. And viewers will often hear me say, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. If we truly value healthcare in this country, and we recognize coming out of the pandemic some of the colossal failures and visions within within the federation on how each province deals with healthcare, we know that there has been a starving of a system in some instances, and there needs to be a recalibration in others. So this is a priority, and what New Democrats have always said has been that healthcare, the delivery of publicly accessible healthcare across the country, is a top priority, always has been, always will be, and that's what we're here to fight for.
Susan, what do you make of Mr. Singh's threat? Do you think the deal is in danger?
I don't think it's in immediate danger, but that Mr. Singh has to do that. He can't look like he's too close to the Liberals ever, or he loses his validity or his value as the leader of a separate party. So he worked with the Liberals, and dental care got passed this semester or this term. I think that's an excellent, a huge win for both the Liberals and the NDP. Mr. Singh can say, hey, I contributed to that, but he doesn't want to look too close. And Kim's right. It was always part of the deal, or the terms at the beginning, was that they would support the government on matters of confidence and supply. That's money and things like the throne speech and the budget, et cetera, but that they would disagree. So I am not surprised that Mr. Singh would disagree. He needs to carve out his own space. He needs to make sure the closer we get to the end of this minority government, that he does occupy his own space, and that people can make a distinction between Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre and Jagmeet Singh. And the more, as the way things go with this current parliament as it sits, it very much looks like it will be a decision between the Liberals and the Conservatives in the next election. Those are the two sides of the aisle distinctly for people. So Mr. Singh is fighting for his spot.
Kate, what do you make of his words that he would pull support if there was not more healthcare dollars?
Yeah, let's be real about who's in control of the supply arrangement. It is the Liberals, and it is Justin Trudeau. Certainly, they are the ones that are going to control when we go to the next election. I think the NDP, of course, have a lot of work to do in terms of their ground game, in terms of fundraising. We saw that play out in a relatively poor performance from the NDP this past week in the by-election in Mississauga. So the Liberals are holding the cards here. This is very much about posturing on the part of the NDP. He's right to do it because contrast wins campaigns, but I wouldn't be looking at this and saying that this is a sign that the agreement is up in the air. I think very much it's here to stay until Justin Trudeau says that it's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned the by-election in Mississauga Lakeshore. I want to also talk about that as well, because here we have the former Ontario Finance Minister Charles Sousa winning that vote, that by-election. Kim, the Tories did not really move the bar, even with Poilievre in leadership. Kate might be talking about the NDP in that riding, but the Conservatives didn't really move the bar. What does that tell you about Tory hopes of trying to take seats in the rich area of GTA in any election?
Yeah, Kate and the Conservatives want to talk about, New Democrats being sidelined. And I appreciate that, because what we saw out of this is that Pierre Poilievre might have been able to handily win the Conservative leadership vote. But when it comes to Gen Pop, to the voters, to Conservative and potential Conservative voters, they are just not having this. And in fact, the Conservatives' vote went down from almost winning in the last general election under Aaron O'Toole to getting less than half of their vote to show up this time. That should cause for serious cause for concern for the Poilievre team Can they show up? They've had key organizers on the ground in Mississauga Lakeshore all the way through, and it just didn't translate. In fact, Mr. Poilievre tried to stay away from it, as he has done with mainstream media. He's now staying away from voters. It does cause for concern, and it should, and Conservatives I have talked to are rightly questioning what they've gotten themselves into. It was the criticism of Mr. Poilievre going into the leadership. It's great to get people to sign up those memberships, but can you deliver them to the ballot box when it counts? And it looks like absolutely not. So if this had been an Aaron O'Toole by-election, Mr. Poilievre would have been the first one sharpening the knives. So I have some questions about some Conservative conversations over the holidays.
Susan, what do you make of the result in Mississauga Lakeshore?
Well, it was Charles Sousa is a very strong candidate. He was a provincial finance minister in Ontario, well known and a household name. So congratulations to him on winning the seat with over 50% of the vote. That's what you want to look at. Look, by-elections usually are unfavorable to sitting governments. So the fact that Mr. Sousa won in largely a Liberal-friendly riding, but won handily and with a larger margin than the last federal election, is something that I think the Conservatives should be thinking about. I think the 905 is going to be a real battle in the next election. Pierre Poilievre is going to have to show moderate Canadians that he's not the pugilist that he has prided himself on being. And he's always said he's not going to change. So that may leave him a bit or a lot behind in the 905 region. The next election will be very interesting. One by-election does not a federal election make, but I think Mr. Sousa won handily. People said in that riding, definitely said no thank you to Pierre Poilievre and his kind of politics. And the Conservatives need to read those tea leaves and see if they need to pivot and adjust. I'm not sure Poilievre can or will, because he's so dug in on, I don't want to talk to the media. And maybe he doesn't want to talk to people who aren't asking him the exact questions he wants to either. He's a bubble boy. So he's going to have to change that if he wants to win the country.
Mm-hmm. Kate, any lessons for the Tories here?
I think so. I'm not sure that it will be a total strategic overhaul because, to Susan's point, there was a lot of dynamics in this particular by-election that were not going in the Conservatives' favor. But that's not an excuse. The party performed much better in 2021, a 20-point differential. I don't think anybody's patting themselves on the back over that over at party headquarters. So there should be some considerations given about what might need to change. I think that the real lesson to be learned here is going back to what worked for Stephen Harper's government, Jason Kenney when he was Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, and that is building authentic and genuine relationships with Canadians from multicultural backgrounds. That is an absolute must. The party has now hired somebody to take that on and coordinate outreach. And so I think many Conservatives are hoping for a much better performance in subsequent by-elections and in the GTA writ large, heading into whenever the next election should be.
I'm going to correct myself as well. I said rich GTA. I should have meant seat-rich GTA. I'm just told I made that trip. So seat-rich GTA. Listen, Susan, talking about Charles Sousa, though, as you said, he did win. It does raise the specter of a potential cabinet shuffle, or else Mr. Sousa would have to really be content to sit in the backbenches. What do you say to that?
I don't think anything's been promised to Charles Sousa. There have been people who've been in cabinet, highly capable people who have yet to make the front benches of cabinet. So I think the Prime Minister will have to think long and hard about the deep talent pool that now includes Mr. Sousa as he contemplates a shuffle. I fully expect a shuffle in the new year. There will be people who are not, who are retiring, not running again. The Prime Minister will want to shake things up. Will Charles Sousa be in the mix? I think absolutely they'll be looking at him, but it wouldn't shock me if he wasn't in the mix for the next shuffle this time around. We'll see. Like I said, deep bench, great talent pool for the Prime Minister to draw from. Lots of regional, gender, ethnic balance to contend with. Cabinet making is not fun, I don't think, for people. So we'll see what the outcome is.
Kate, what are you watching out for here?
Yeah, well, there could be a bit of a caucus management issue that accompanies a cabinet shuffle. There have been a lot of people waiting for a long time, and maybe because they're not from the part of a country that's maybe overrepresented in cabinet, they're not getting their fair shake. So if you allow Charles Sousa into cabinet without in some way recognizing the many other people that have been waiting for their opportunity, you might have more and more caucus members start to express some disappointment and displeasure at that. So I think it's a very likely possibility for a shuffle. One's been rumored for a while. A lot of ministers have had to do some hard work in portfolios that I think they're not particularly fond of, and they're looking for a change. And that could be an opportunity for Sousa to come in, but it should be an opportunity for some others that have been waiting patiently for their turn as well.
Yeah, and Kim, what are you looking at here?
Well, then there's the additional layer of the Ontario Liberal Party leadership, and there are a couple of folks who are senior Liberals in Ontario who are looking to maybe take a shift to provincial politics. You know, you would look at people like Nate Erskine-Smith, we look at people like Yasser Naqvi, and others within the Ontario Liberal caucus who have been testing the water, shall we speak. So those will be also things beyond the retirements and the long in the tooth nature of this federal government that the Prime Minister is going to have to look at. And, you know, Chrystia Freeland cannot continue to be essentially the minister of everything when you've got some other folks who would like some rewards as well.
Susan, Kate, and Kim, thank you. Have a great holiday break. We'll see you in the new year.
Thanks, Michael.
Sounds great.
You too.
Earlier this week, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister and the Foreign Affairs Minister appeared before a Commons committee, and they were asked questions about Chinese interference in the 2019 campaign. Now, the concern does follow a global news report. It was published last month. And while an intelligence briefing did warn of an active foreign interference campaign, Dominic LeBlanc said an assessment found no negative effect on the results nor on the outcomes of the vote. For her part, the Foreign Affairs Minister seemed to equate any interference to online disinformation. And earlier this week, I did speak to Mélanie Joly about the issue. Listen, I want to begin here with your appearance before our Commons Committee this week, because the committee members, they really wanted to know about these reports of Chinese meddling in the 2019 election. I'm wondering what you might be able to share with people who are watching this interview right now about that incident or incidences of interference.
Well, I answered the committee yesterday, as mentioned by the Prime Minister, as mentioned by the NSIA, Jody Thomas, as mentioned also by my colleague Dominic LeBlanc. We have no information regarding such interference, foreign interference in the 2019 elections. Of course, we take this issue extremely seriously because obviously it's in our own public interest, our own shared interest to address this issue, but we don't have any information to that regard.
So you don't know, for example, whether or not it's just limited to the 2019 vote or whether or not it's just limited to those dozen or so ridings and candidates?
Well, you know, we have no information to that regard. What I can tell you, though, is before the 2019 elections, we had concerns regarding foreign interference, particularly in light of what had happened in other democracies. And when I think about foreign interference, I particularly think about disinformation online, and which is affecting all democracies. And we know already that China and Russia is undergoing proactive disinformation online campaigns to destabilize many democracies, including ours. And so that's why we put into place an important process, which is headed by nonpartisan experts. And they also said that in 2019 there was no foreign interference. And so that is why the story that came out regarding this 2019 possible foreign interference is important, but at the same time, we need to have evidence. And right now, I don't have that evidence. The Prime Minister doesn't have that evidence. Our public service and national security agencies, including CSIS, don't have that intelligence. So that's the information I can provide you today.
Mm-hmm. So I do wonder then, because you did meet with your Chinese counterparts on the sidelines, but you did meet with them when you were in Bali for the G20. So what did you say to them regarding interference? If you did not have specifics, what were you actually talking to them about?
Well, definitely disinformation online, because we know that there is proactive disinformation happening. And I said in general that foreign interference is not tolerable in Canada. We just won't accept it. And so it was not a conversation. I looked at him in the eye, and that's what I told him. So this is what we do in diplomacy. We actually give tough messages sometimes, and sometimes we are much more in collaboration mode. But when it comes to foreign interference, this is about the strength and the viability of our own democracy. So basically our position is the same with every single country, period.
Now, as we talk about China, you know, of course, you did unveil a new Indo-Pacific strategy at the end of November. You described China during that announcement as a disruptive global power. And that really is a huge shift, because back in 2017, your government described China as an important partner. So is your strategy now an acknowledgement that China is no longer a friend?
Well, clearly, China has interests that departs from our interests. And China works every day more and more to either violate international norms, or I would say also bend international norms in their favor. There are two schools of thoughts which are in opposition right now. The one that is the one that basically President Putin is abiding by, which is essentially international norms do not and should not be, how can I say, followed, because he believes that being a nuclear power and having a sphere of influence is more important. And at the same time, there's us and our allies, and actually many countries around the world, which are about really protecting international norms. Canada has been an architect of developing these international norms following the Second World War. These norms have kept us safe since that time, and we need to make sure that we work obviously with our friends, obviously with our allies, but also with many other countries which have in common with Canada the protection of the UN Charter and also the protection of the basic principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which are at the core of the world's stability.
So if we are diverging in philosophies, then what does that mean for something like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? As you know, Conservatives have been raising that issue for years now. They basically say at this point that Liberals are talking the talk, not walking the walk. What does it mean for the future of Canada's involvement with that bank? Is it done? Is it going to wrap up?
Well, what we've done, we've addressed this issue in the Indo-Pacific strategy, and I know the Minister of Finance also is on this. But what I can tell you, though, is that in the Indo-Pacific strategy, what we decided to do is to invest even more in bilateral support and bilateral infrastructure support. So we decided to put $750 million into an infrastructure fund through FinDev, and that will be helpful for countries across the region that are in need of infrastructure, particularly infrastructure that deal with the impacts of climate change. I'm thinking of the Philippines, I'm thinking about Vietnam, about India, and definitely also about Indonesia and Singapore. So these are just countries that we will engage with regarding this very issue.
But will you divest yourself of the investment bank, though? Again, that's a 1% share, to my understanding, that Canada has, but it is a bank in league with China. Will we divest ourselves out of that bank?
Well, what we said regarding that bank also is, since many countries, including European counterparts, are part of it, we want to make sure that all our investments are well taken care of, and at the same time follow the basic guidelines of international norms. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we increase our influence in the region, and that's why we're investing even more money through FinDev and that infrastructure fund.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the ownership of the bank, though, is that something to be debated in future?
Of course, everything that goes against our national security will guide, our national security will guide our decisions, and anything that goes against national security, of course, will take the right decisions.
Listen, I also want to talk about Haiti because the Prime Minister, as you well know, wants European countries to join Canada and sanction Haitian players who have ties to gangs that have been terrorizing the country. How important are those sanctions? How important is it that Europe get on side with what Canada has already done?
Well, sanctions in Haiti against the political and the economic elite are extremely important. Canada has been I would say, forward-leaning when it comes to imposing sanctions. Our goal is definitely to make sure that the U.S. imposes more sanctions, the Europeans as well. And I'm having important discussions with my counterparts to that regard, because we think this will create enough pressure on those that are benefiting from the violence that is spread by the gangs throughout Haiti. And so it is a new way to put pressure. It has never been done. But there's no impunity for those who support the gangs. And there's no impunity for also the ones in charge of the gangs. So we know that the Haitian people are right now suffering in Haiti. We want to be there to help them. We will be there to help them. But of course, we will support any solutions as long as they're Haitian-led and also by and for Haitians.
Well, to that, Ambassador Bob Rae did brief your government on his mission to Haiti. We know there is a desire. In fact, we heard it from the U.S. Secretary of State when he was standing right beside you here in Ottawa. There's this desire for Canada to lead a multinational effort in Haiti. Do you think, based on what you heard from Ambassador Rae, do you think there is a role for Canada to play?
Of course there's a role for Canada to play in Haiti, and we're playing it right now through our sanctions, through our humanitarian aid, but also through having this important conversation about the security of Haiti. Canada has been a long-time friend to Haiti. It will continue to be. And yes, indeed, because we are a bilingual country, because we've always had a good relationship with Haitian people, because we have a big diaspora also from Haiti in Canada, we have that expertise. We have that experience. We've been involved through the UN in many of their missions, and we will continue to help the Haitians that are suffering, like I mentioned a bit earlier.
Minister, I appreciate you're very busy. Just one more question, if you don't mind. And this has to do with Ukraine, because I do want to get your thoughts. Not so much here in Canada, but right now in the United States, we're seeing a number of Republicans now starting to question the monetary commitments and support for Ukraine as this war goes on. What would you say to Canadians who may also have similar questions about the money committed by Canada to support this war effort?
Well, indeed, we've been very supportive. We believe in the importance of supporting Ukraine through military aid, through financial support, through humanitarian aid, because it is fundamental to make sure that Ukraine wins. Because the Ukrainians are right now fighting for their lives, but also fighting for their freedom and our freedom. And so by supporting Ukraine, we will make sure that we send a strong message to all these countries that even think of invading their neighbor.
Mr. Joly, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The government's attempt to have its signature gun bill passed in the House before the holiday break failed. There are serious questions about the bill and its effect on hunting weapons, so committee members, they want more consultation. But as that happens in Ottawa, Alberta is now signaling its provincial prosecutors will determine when to pursue charges under the Firearms Act and not federal prosecutors. Take a listen to the Alberta Justice Minister, Tyler Shandro, followed by the reaction from Federal Minister David Lametti.
Their actions are targeting Western Canadians for a reason. This is about shoring up their own political support. To do so, they seek to divide us. Western Canadians versus Eastern Canadians, rural Canadians versus urban Canadians. And Albertans have had enough.
The federal government tries to stick to its lanes. Whether it's on this or any other matter, we do make an effort to stay within federal jurisdiction. We've had some success with that jurisdiction being upheld in the courts, and we expect the provinces to do the same.
So, to talk about the issue, let's bring in our journalist panel for this week. Robert Fife is the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Susan Delacourt is a national columnist for the Toronto Star, and Tyler Dawson is the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. Hello to the three of you.
Hello. Hello.
Tyler, I'm going to get you to start us out here. Minister Shandro says the government will not be directing Crown prosecutors. Rather, they'll be providing advice on how to proceed with firearm charges. Does this fall under a constitutional challenge, or is this just political theater?
Well, I think it's probably more on the political theater side of things. And the reason I say that is because, they're not forcing prosecutors to do something one way or the other. They're setting out sort of guidelines where they think that these charges would be justified and where they wouldn't be. And then the prosecutors, the Crowns remain sort of independent on this. So what they choose to do sort of remains to be seen. But I would also just quickly add that this isn't entirely unusual or unheard of. British Columbia largely didn't prosecute cannabis offenses for a long time. Quebec in the 1970s and 80s didn't really prosecute abortion when it was still a crime. So this isn't totally uncharted territory, but it certainly sets the stage, I think, for a political confrontation.
Mm-hmm. And to that, Susan, Ottawa does continue to respond with this kind of wait-and-see attitude. What kind of political hot potato is the Alberta Declaration for the Trudeau government and even the opposition parties?
Well, I think it becomes a political hot potato when it feeds into other stories, that, for example, Danielle Smith's bill to, exempt Alberta from, or I don't even know how to put it, to prevent Alberta from going along with the laws it doesn't like. I think you're seeing with Ottawa that it's saying we're going to deal with the people of Alberta. No, we're not going to have government fights. I think you'll hear more of that from them. I don't think they are in the mood for a constitutional fight, and what they'll be framing this as Canadians aren't in the mood for constitutional fights either.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Robert, do you think Shandro's statement will have any kind of impact on the Trudeau government's gun legislation?
Look, the federal government was boneheaded in changing the legislation at the last minute to include the kind of hunting weapons that are used by hunters and the Inuit and farmers. These are guns that are used by people who live in rural areas, who like to hunt or like to make sure that if they're farmers that they can shoot coyotes or whatever, maybe preying on their livestock. And certainly it's the weapons that are used by the indigenous people who like to go hunting for moose or for seal or whatever. And it's mind-boggling that they didn't go and ask a couple of rural liberal backbenchers to say, what about this? If they did, they wouldn't have done this. And it feeds into a narrative for Danielle Smith that this government is out of touch with Alberta, out of touch with rural Canada. So they've gone back to the drawing board on that. But it's the federal government's fault in this one, where I think they really overplayed their hands because they didn't think it through.
Mm-hmm. So it's obviously something we're going to watch. The House has risen for the year, so we're going to watch that in the new year. Let's talk about healthcare as well. And Susan, I'll get you to start us off on this because, Ottawa and the provinces, as we all know, at an impasse right now. But to hear it from Minister Duclos, the health ministers have some kind of a deal or perhaps basis of a deal to move forward. So Susan, is this impasse also political theater?
I am wondering how this is going to be sorted out. I'm of two minds at the moment. There is obviously some sort of impasse, whether it's theatrical or just logistics. I don't know whether it's going to be solved by a meeting between the First Ministers. I'm starting to think that this government is going to handle this the way it has done childcare deals, for example, with one deal with each province and building up to some sort of national patchwork program. Or patchwork reforms of the healthcare system. I do think we saw this during the convoy hearings. Governments talk to each other very differently, apparently, behind the scenes than they do in front of the cameras. So it would not surprise me that there are more constructive discussions going on, as Minister Duclos has hinted. But I still don't know whether we're going to be going to a First Ministers meeting on health or more of a childcare type of arrangement. Mm-hmm. And to wait and see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Robert, the Prime Minister says he needs a commitment from the provinces to change delivery before any more money flows out. And it has me wondering, what exactly is he looking for here? Are we talking about national standards? Are we looking for specific policy planks? What exactly is Trudeau waiting for?
Well, I mean, they're looking for there are solutions out there that fix the healthcare system. It's been provided by healthcare professionals, from doctors and nurses, and the feds are looking at it as well. And what they're saying is, look, let's have a modern data sharing system between the provinces so we can streamline the process. Let's make sure that we can figure out a way to recognize foreign credentials of doctors and nurses. And let's do more about retention and training of healthcare officials. Those are kind of the three or four main issues that need to be resolved in this. And, what we're seeing is political games between, which is the same old stuff we hear all the time between the provinces and the federal government over money. And I agree with Susan. I think the federal government is simply going to say, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to cut individual deals with individual provinces to achieve our goals, and we'll cut checks for provinces who agree to do so.
Mm-hmm. Tyler, I'm wondering, as someone outside the Ottawa bubble, how is this stalemate being perceived, do you think?
I think people are mostly concerned about the stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the deal at this moment. I think the issues are emergency room wait times, and the issues are children's hospital overcrowding and surgery cancellations and things like that. I think to some extent, at least the people in my life who've had contact with the medical system recently, they're not paying all that much attention to what's going on between the health ministers. They're far more concerned about the level of service and the care they're getting when they need it. So I think those two issues have the potential to merge in the months ahead. But, at this moment, I think that most people are more concerned with sort of the immediate issue in front of them, and not sort of questions of money and funding and agreements on data sharing and things like that. It seems like too much, when you're struggling to find a family doctor or waiting for 8 hours in an emergency room.
Yeah, but I think that goes to the question of, who does this fall under? Who are people blamed for this? Is it the provincial level or the federal level? What would you say to that, Tyler?
Well, I think it probably varies a little bit by province, if I had to speculate. But certainly in Alberta, I think a lot of the blame is falling on the provincial government. There is sort of this healthcare reform attempt going on in Alberta right now. There has been a really ugly relationship between the government and doctors for quite some time. The pandemic handling or mismanagement, depending what sort of side of the question you're on, still lingers. So I do think here, at least, it's the provincial government that is getting the brunt of it. But of course, that could change. If the province starts saying, well, look, we can solve these problems if Trudeau comes to the table, all of a sudden that becomes a pretty different perception, I think.
Okay, so another one that we're watching for, and really we're going to watch for a lot because, as I said earlier, the House has now risen for the holiday break. They are back at the end of January, and since this is our last panel before the new year, I'm kind of wondering what each one of you will be watching out for in 2023. There's already talk of a cabinet shuffle. Of course, we're going to wait for the Rouleau report. Robert, start us off. What are you watching out for?
Well, I want to see what the government, what Chrystia Freeland is going to do in the budget. To set out a framework for an industrial policy. Look what has happened in the United States. President Biden has announced billions of dollars to manufacture microchips and chips in the United States. He's brought in massive infrastructure legislation to be able to rebuild American roads and cities. And he has brought in this enormous package. It's called the Inflation Reduction Bill, but it's actually about green technology, electric cars, the whole gamut. And, this is going to mean that the United States is going to be an epicenter for potential economic growth and a revitalization of its manufacturing base. And we better get ahead of this. Because we can't let it all go to the United States. So I think we need to match this in scope and in vision, and we'll see whether they do that in the budget.
Susan, what are you looking for in 2023?
A few things. I'm glad Bob mentioned the States. I'm looking for a Biden visit. Joe Biden has not yet been to this country as president. He came as vice president. I'm looking also at the relations between the government and its opposition parties. I want to see if the Liberal NDP deal holds. And I also want to watch the evolution of Pierre Poilievre as Conservative leader. We've already seen that there's been a tone shift from how he ran for opposition, and I want to see the continuation of that education of Pierre Poilievre.
And Tyler, what are you looking out for?
I'm going to have to put a bit of an Alberta spin on it. I'm interested to see what the Liberals and the Conservatives do once the Alberta Sovereignty Act begins to be used. Do the Liberals finally see an advantage to really having a fight over this? Does Pierre Poilievre see an advantage to sort of backing the Alberta approach, or is he going to try and stay out of it? So I think that is the dynamic, at least from where I'm sitting, that I'm going to be keeping an eye on next year.
Well, you're not alone. Many people across the country will be keeping an eye on that as well. Listen to the three of you, to Robert, Susan, Tyler, thank you for the time today. Have a happy holiday, and I'll bug you to join us again in the new year.
Happy holidays to you.
You too. Happy New Year.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Take care. And that is our program for this weekend. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, have a great holiday. This is our last program of 2022. We'll see you again in the new year.